Welcome to Intended Consequences, the official podcast of the StrategyCorp Institute of Public Policy and Economy. My name is Aidan Grovewhite, and today's episode is brought to you by StrategyCorp's Land and Infrastructure Development Practice. Today, I'll be speaking to Jason Burggraaf, Executive Director of the Greater Ottawa Home Builders Association, and Dave Wilkes, the President and CEO of the Building Industry and Land Development Association, or BUILD. StrategyCorp recently put out a developer survey to take stock of where the industry is at, and the findings painted a pretty stark picture. Across the province, developers are facing a perfect storm with rising costs, uncertain demand, even with record population growth, higher interest rates, and a regulatory environment that isn't keeping pace, yet seems to change every 5 minutes. But there are also important regional differences. Here in the GTA, we're seeing record low sales and developers shifting towards purpose-built rental instead of condos, albeit producing much lower yields. And in Ottawa, the push for intensification is happening, but there are regulatory bottlenecks that remain a challenge both for infill and greenfield development. All of this is happening during a period of rapid population growth when we would expect demand to push the sector to deliver even more supply, but that's not happening. Uh, Jason, have I set the table right? Is it really this bleak right now?
So it's pretty bleak across the province for sure. We're definitely sort of in the low end of the housing cycle. Although Ottawa itself is actually kind of crawling out of that low point from 2024 or 2023 to 2024. Sales are actually up 40%. So Ottawa is kind of crawling out of the bottom. I don't see that in the rest of the province, and I'm sure Dave can comment. But we're seriously looking at some headwinds, tariffs, federal election, just general economic malaise moving forward that I'm afraid locally is going to slow down all that momentum that we built up.
And Dave,
Yeah, I wish I had the similar report from the GTA that Jason does in Ottawa. In December, we saw the lowest number of units sold in the GTA in the 30 years that our partners at Altus have been tracking sales. There was approximately 300 units sold across the GTA, all types, low rise, high rise, mid rise. So it is a really challenging environment within the Greater Toronto Area. There's a number of factors that are causing that challenge in our view, and I would bucket them into three areas: the cost to build, the speed of approvals, and the ability to identify service land for increasing both single family, low rise types developments as well as higher density. So it's a challenge right now. I don't want to leave your listeners with all gloom, because I think there are things that are very positive about the current environment, but certainly sales are not one of them.
so I think one of the things that I've found challenging working with both community groups and decision makers on this is that they keep looking at, well, there's the population is growing. Where are all these people? Where are all these people going? If not new homes, or they might look at they look at all the constructions sites across our cities and say, well, it looks like everything's doing okay. But I think what it sort of gets in the way of the conversation is, well, that's decisions that were made several years ago. So what is stopping our sector, Dave, from actually pulling the trigger on new development today? You mentioned those three buckets, but maybe we can get you to dig in a little bit more into them.
Of course, and you nailed it. People look upwards and they see cranes in the skies when they're looking at in urban areas, but you look at those cranes too, and they're nearing completion. The floors are almost at the top of the cranes, so it is sales that were done 3-4 years ago. What we're really worried is the supply from a Toronto perspective, because of those lots of sales that I've mentioned in 27 and 28. We're just not going to see deliveries. Now, it is a little more extreme on the high rise than on the low rise side, which mirrors more of what Ottawa is seeing, that beginning to see some increasing demand for low rise products. So I want to caution there. But yeah, if I just take a look at one of them, cost to build, there's about 4 or 5 factors that will influence the ability to performance with the developers. The land, the materials, the labor, the financing, and government fees and taxes. The first 4 of those are influenced by the market. And we have seen downward pressure and materials, recent tariff discussions aside. We have seen labor adjusting. We have seen land adjusting. Now, a lot of people still have old land that is more expensive than current land that is available, and there's not much trading going on with land that is on the market, but it is coming down. And we are seeing financing rates come down, as you know, with interest rates adjusting. Where we are seeing some stickiness, a lot of stickiness, is in particular at the municipal level, where governments are, through development charges, through parkland, through CVCs, that 25% at a minimum that contributes to the cost to build, 6.25 years in someone's mortgage when you add it up and put it in a different context, that isn't influenced by the market. That's influenced by political leadership. And I commend, and this is where I see the green shoots of positivity, Vaughan and Mississauga from a GTA perspective, that have really made some tough decisions to lower their DCs and reflect the pressure that's on the cost to build so products can be developed that the market can absorb. So to us, that's the major challenge and opportunity that presents itself. And it's a twofold opportunity: short-term political leadership to address the cost immediately, but more importantly, longer-term political leadership to change the way that we apply government fees and taxes to new homes, particularly in play the way we apply development charges.
So Jason, swinging out over to Ottawa, is the grass really greener over there? Is it easier to get stuff to market in the Ottawa area?
It definitely still has its own challenges for sure, and pretty much everything that Dave listed through, you see in Ottawa as well. The kind of one thing I'd say about the demographics is, which is kind of how you led the conversation, was, I mean, you can't build on demographics alone, right? You build on the consumer demand that's at the door, that's at sales homes. And right now, and for the past 2 years, right, we've seen very little consumer demand, despite the fact the population's growing and everything else, right? People are kind of just waiting on the sidelines. And if you don't have those sales coming in the door, you don't have people pre-buying condo buildings, right? You can't then move your project can't move your project forward. So that's the real hiccup the past few years, is just the price has just gotten to a point where people can't take it in, and they're kind of waiting out now with all this other economic uncertainty to actually jump into the market.
So one of the takeaways that we had from working with you folks in Ottawa was also that it wasn't just the financial foundation of the building industry, it's also the policy and the process side of having, there's a partnership between municipalities and home builders in order to see things progress. Dave mentioned that there were, some positive moves by Vaughan and Mississauga to, in a financial way, show that partnership. But Jason, in Ottawa, where are some of the areas that you think either the city of Ottawa itself or municipalities around Ottawa could do things to sort of help those green shoots along, and maybe make sure that the ground is ready for new housing to go?
Yeah, the biggest struggle overall is just processing applications for sure, and it's not just the staff processing; it's also the legal side of things as well. So what you really need to do is start looking at ways to move that timeline along. Like, I'll point to Mississauga again, not just the financial side, but Mississauga has a process where if the city comes back and circulates for 3 times, then you got an automatic deemed complete on your thing, right? And right now, Ottawa's kind of more in you can just have this constant back and forth of comments. You fulfill the comments or the conditions that are put on, and then you get more comments, right? And constant circulations and no deadlines from the legal department of issuing you your agreements. So all of those things are what makes the dragging of application permits in Ottawa. And I'm sure it's not just distinct to here. There are plenty of other places too. And of course, the smaller the municipalities have even less capacity and less staffing to process those, but they're starting to see more and more demand branch out from bigger locals that they're surrounding. So they're getting all that population growth and application pressure and don't have the staff or capacity to process.
I think Premier Ford, I've heard him from even back when he was a city councilor, he called this the carousel, the going around and around and around in circles. And something that came up in the research that we did was those municipalities, the problem sort of is a deep issue for them around human resources, around making sure that they've got their department staffed up to process applications quickly, but also We can see applications get completely derailed just when a new person sits in the chair. So something that was either negotiated or dealt with in a previous circulation comes up, I guess, brand new when the new person sits there and looks at it, if I'm being charitable, with fresh eyes. And then you have to sometimes go through a whole new circulation to deal with something in the third circulation that you thought you dealt with in the first. But going back to the finances for a minute, it's always been complicated, but it really does seem like we're hitting like a breaking point, certainly in the GTA. And Dave, over to you. Like, what do you see as the biggest issues in how we're funding development? Like, yes, the development charges, I think it's something we really need to make sure people are aware of. But, are there changes as well to how we're funding development that as an industry, even on that private side of funding, we're looking to figure out a way through?
Yeah, so I think there's short term and long term, as we had chatted earlier. Um, because there's no activity right now, a phrase that's being used a lot is zero, zero is zero. So if you're not issuing any permits, you're not getting any DCs or parkland or anything else like that. So the opportunity cost to take a hard look at potentially a temporary or other type of relief in those charges does exist right now. And I mentioned Vaughan and Mississauga earlier. I also should mention Burlington. Although they didn't decrease their DCs, but they took a hard look to make sure things that were in the background study actually belong there and could be financed within the time frame that the DC was covering. So they were probably the first out of the gate in that area. And the way I interpret financing is, how does the necessary investments that are required to facilitate new housing get paid for? Right. And so that's where, and we released a paper in collaboration with our friends at Ontario Home Builders on looking at the DC model. Now, we don't believe DC should be scrapped. We believe that the act that is probably 30 odd years old should be modernized. And there's two key things that, if you just did these two things, it would structurally reduce the cost of DCs by about 40 or 50%. Change the way water and wastewater is funded, use a utility model as opposed to front loading it all into DC costs. And also the land that is included in DCs, compensate municipalities for the actual land they're purchasing, not the land that they believe they're going to purchase or need for a library or whatever it might be based on historical experiences.
It really highlights the challenge with the DC model as we run it here. And another municipality that tried something different is Toronto, that they waived the DCs for developers that could meet a pretty deep definition of affordable. They had space for 9,000 unit, and 30,000 units came in to apply. And if nothing else, I think that shows just how much of a weight the DCs can be on a pro forma, how much they can stop something from progressing. And those are supposed to get started construction before the end of 2026. We'll see how many come out from it, but it's stark illustration of when you say, I'll lift this weight off of your finances, how quickly the sector met the opportunity. Jason, do you have an additional sort of take over in Ottawa?
Well, especially on the finance side of things, we can't dismiss the cost for related to risk and uncertainty and how that translates into finance. Because ultimately, your lender boils it down just to bigger contingencies, right, in the pro forma of your project in order to protect against that kind of risk, right? So that's more money you have to raise or more money you have to cover by yourself, and then you have less capital to do other projects. So as this risk and uncertainty stays and sometimes even gets bigger, you might have several projects in the pipeline, but the money you have access to, now you have to start prioritizing, right? You have to start picking and choosing which projects you move ahead with. So, Ottawa has, 10 to a dozen really big builders who do a lot of things. They're building subdivisions and tall towers and commercial and industrial and everything else. But depending on the access to capital, you've got to start, you can't move ahead with 12 projects, right? In a given year, you might have to cut it down to 6 or even less than that. And that's when you start, seeing this build up in the pipeline, all because, again, the financing isn't there because is there because of the risk and uncertainty in the market currently.
Is there a particular policy fix that you would have at the municipal or the provincial level to ease that a little bit, Jason, or is it out of the hands of government?
It is a little, but CMHC say the feds have done a decent job of getting more lending, related to for-purpose building, right? Through CMHC, they could look at doing that in other parts, in other 10 years as well.
And Aidan, can I build on that? I think where you can address uncertainty, and it's something that Jason talked about earlier, speed of approvals, right? Providing clarity around zoning. So part of the risk averse nature of this industry, in any industry where you have a lot of capital on the line, is letting know when you can get that ROI. So if we do a biannual benchmarking report with Canadian Home Builders Association and look at a number of jurisdictions across Canada. The GTA is always one of the longest as far as approvals, 3 to 4 years. But that's 3 to 4 years where that money is sitting, wondering when it's going to get to work. Similarly with zoning changes. So I think what government has, within its mandate, within its responsibility, is ensuring it provides an efficient approval system. As Jason mentioned, Mississauga has looked at. We have seen other changes in Toronto and elsewhere where they're trying to restructure. More needs to be done for sure. You look further west in Edmonton and Calgary at the national benchmarking study, they do things in a matter of weeks, not a matter of years. So we do know that there is a better process out there. That is definitely one thing that that government could do. Investing in infrastructure to ensure that there's new lands available and zone those to once again provide that opportunity for the population growth that we're expecting. So certainly there will always be things outside of the control of the regulator, but there are things that are squarely inside the control of that regulator as well.
So I've been pretty taken by working with some clients and actually seeing that they price in that uncertainty into their pro formas. It shows up as an actual percentage of the overall cost of a unit. And something, we're having this conversation on February 10th. We just dodged one tariff bullet by 30 days. We don't know what's going to happen at the end of the month. We're hearing at some point there could be tariffs on steel and aluminum as early as later today. And I'm wondering what's going to happen to that sort of risk bar in the pro forma, how much of a percentage or how our sector is going to be able to incorporate that. Are you hearing anything in Ottawa, Jason, from your members about what they're thinking around tariffs, interest rates, and inflation? Are the big picture issues impacting the decisions that they're making out there?
Right now there's still a lot of wait and see, for sure. Say like something that is used elsewhere isn't really done very much in Ottawa. It's like a cost escalation clause, right? Especially for construction materials. I know other companies do use them. I don't find that they tend to be very prevalent in Ottawa. But maybe that's something you start really doing. To be honest, though, my bigger concern about the tariffs and everything else are not so much what builders are going to do, but it's the consumer confidence side of things, right? And I kind of hit it at the top of the discussion about the momentum in Ottawa sales. It's the concern about the tariffs and the perception that it's going to have a significant impact on construction costs, that it'll just drive even more people to sit on the sidelines and say, okay, well, you know what, I'm going to wait this out because, prices are going to be higher for the next little bit and blah, blah, blah. And I'll see, let this thing play out and let kind of construction costs level out to wherever they're going to be. So that's the part that I am especially afraid of, is on the consumer confidence side.
If I can build on that, Aidan, I think I would reference three things. You have the direct costs. And, during the initial 25% threat, 10% for energy, things like appliances, windows, insulation behind the drywall, those were all things where we did anticipate cost increase. And depending on the project, 3 to 5% increase on a already very tight pro forma would have had a direct impact. I couldn't agree with Jason more. Consumers' confidence, consumer confidence, consumer confidence. And that's where I think we really need strong leadership to manage the threat in the most effective and and with the greatest degree of certainty as possible. And then one of the themes we've been talking about, it's a very uncertain time. And in certain time, not only does capital stay on the sidelines as it relates to large projects, but capital stays on the sidelines as it relates to individual buyer decisions when they're looking at large purchases such as a home. So I can't overstate the need for strong leadership from our governments to manage this threat. And I think that, and I would agree with my colleague Jason, that is the bigger risk, without minimizing the direct costs. But the big we cannot quantify the concern around uncertainty and confidence.
So with that, where would you want to see the leadership? You mentioned governments, but is it municipalities, the province, the federal government? I mean, we can throw financial institutions or the industry itself. Where do you see the leadership needs to come from, or do we need to see different expressions of leadership in each of those categories?
I think you need to see it from all of us as Canadians. We have a responsibility. Obviously, our government leaders have a direct responsibility, and they can influence those outcomes. They can demonstrate the impacts of tariffs both domestically and on the country that is applying the tariffs. So I think making sure the facts are defining the decisions rather than other sets of circumstances. One of the great things about our industry, it is an industry where a lot of the jobs are provided, here within our various communities. A huge opportunity to invest in this industry to make sure that jobs are provided in times of uncertainty, potentially in other sectors. Not that we're playing winners and losers, but there is a unique opportunity as it relates to housing and making sure that we all are proud of who we are and what we do.
Jason, have you anything to add?
Keeping the domestic industries going for sure is unbelievably critical to that consumer confidence. Like if we remember back to software lumber and those disputes, ultimately what ends up happening is if lumber isn't going across to the States, then eventually you get a big buildup, right, in your supplies, and lumber mills shut down. And once because they've just got too much ready stock sitting there. And once that happens, then it's months on end to get those things kicked back up again once you start depleting those stocks. So we've seen that in various times. There's softwood lumber 10-ish years ago. It was in drywall tariffs. It's in steel rebar. That dumping cases that were coming across the Pacific. Yeah, and each time there's sort of been a domestic industry response to an increase in supplies and stock that then just slows the economy even more in the end events. So whatever the government can kind of do to keep those items going, and maybe it's even kind of stepping in, to promote more housing. Like a bit of out of the box thinking is maybe now is the time for the government to actually step in if the private market is slow and somehow start building that deeply affordable stuff that it wants to see. However they work that forward.
It sounds like both of you are pointing out that there's a real opportunity here for governments at all levels to work closely with our sector.
And I would, a huge opportunity because I think Jason and I would argue that we have an overall housing supply crisis. So, we can't play favorites, if you will, among different types of housing. We need to, government, in my mind, has opportunity to reduce the cost to build, speed up approvals, designate land for growth. A key opportunity, perhaps, is a HST relief, right? That would immediately, both at the provincial and federal level, reduce the costs that new home purchasers are experiencing for new homes. We've seen some suggest that that's on the table. I think that would be something that would be very well received across the housing spectrum and would provide that backstop we were talking about. So there is a time now. This is a moment. We need that strong leadership in order to provide the confidence, and we need the opportunity to address some of the structural challenges, largely focused on municipal governments, but available to all to embrace.
So we have a lot of policymakers and members of the public who listen to this, and they might be wondering, there's a lot we've talked about today, a lot of different corners of the problem and opportunity. But if there was one thing, Jason, that you would wish policymakers or, other leaders in our industry or even just general public understood about housing development today, what would it be?
So I'm going to ask your indulgence and actually have two. If your planning department isn't as busy right now as it normally is, now is then the ideal time to look at your processes, see if they're as optimal as they can be, so that when things do pick up, which they inevitably will, because housing is cyclical, like we said right from the beginning, right? You'll be ready to kind of hit the ground just as the industry starts really picking up as well. My second item is let's really forget about what current market conditions are when we're crafting our housing and our planning policies. That's really got to be long-term thinking, right? The reason official plans are looking out 20, 30 years ahead of time is because the choices we're making today affect the housing availability and affordability that we'll have 10, 20, 30 years from now. So we really need to think about that long-term thinking and not so much about what the current conditions are today.
So don't use long range planning to solve today's market problems. What about you, Dave? Do you have anything that you wish, members of the public or policymakers take away?
Building on what Jason said, and I think it's been a theme of our discussion. We have a crisis moment now. Sales just are not happening from the GTA perspective. So I would encourage policymakers in our industry to work together to solve those by looking at some things that traditionally were never on the table. Reduction in DCs. We are seeing that leadership in the municipalities that I mentioned to do that. I would encourage everybody from the municipal communities to sit down with your building builders, for people like us that build, say, what would it take to get building back? Because 0, 0, 0. What do we need to do? So have those conversations that you're not used to. And then I would add on to, not only looking at the official plans, looking at the way financing has happened. Is the current structure the right structure? Don't use today's problems to solve for tomorrow's. We need a fundamental restructuring on government fees and taxes as it relates to housing. And DCs is a great place to start. Agree with Jason. Look at your approval processes. Can they be sped up? How can we learn from others? How can we learn from lower cost jurisdictions? So ask questions that you normally don't have the opportunity to ask around approvals, around service lands, around financing, while looking for short-term opportunities to make sure we're delivering housing we're going to need by 2027 and 28.
Well, on that, Dave, Jason, thank you both for talking with us today. Really appreciate it, learned a lot, and I look forward to talking and working with you in the future.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to Intended Consequences. The views expressed during this podcast are not necessarily the views of StrategyCorp. All rights for this episode are reserved, and the guests on the Intended Consequences podcast might be current or past clients of StrategyCorp. To find out more about the work of the Institute and to subscribe to our newsletter, visit our website at strategycorp.com/institute and make sure to follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. I'm Sebastian Lebrac, and I intend to talk to you again next episode.